I want to welcome you to our November community meeting. How many of you are here for the first time? I know that I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces, so I welcome you all. As our name implies, we are very concerned about preserving our democracy, which is currently under threat. There is so much turmoil in our world today. Can people mute themselves if they're not? Well, I will talk over that. There is so much turmoil in our world today. Existential threats in the Mideast and Ukraine, not to mention ongoing conflicts in other parts of the world, chaos in our own government, and the prospect of an authoritarian takeover. The aforementioned threat to our democracy is unparalleled in our history. We also have subgroups concerned with civic values, culture, and education, political corruption, a campaign to register young people, and state teams focused on getting out the vote. Please check us out to further explore where you might fit in. Go to the EAN, Elders Action Network, website and look for the ESD, Elders for Sound Democracy page. We know that democracy is not guaranteed and that each of us has an important part to play to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to vote and to make their voices heard. And who better to hear from than Bill McKibben? And with that, I'm turning the meeting over to Geoff Baker, who will introduce Bill.
Thanks very much, Carol. Well, it's a great pleasure to introduce Bill McKibben, who's one of the most respected and influential environmental activists in the world, undoubtedly familiar to many of us. His first book about climate change, The End of Nature, was published in 1989. 19 books followed, with 12 focused on the environment. His latest book is The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. He is a frequent contributor to numerous publications, including New Yorker, Mother Jones, and Rolling Stone. Bill is the Schumann Distinguished Scholar in Environmental Studies at Middlebury College and a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He received the Gandhi Peace Prize, the Right Livelihood Award, and many other distinguished awards. Bill was instrumental in founding 350.org, which organized protests in every continent and spearheaded international divestment out of fossil fuels. In September of 2021, he launched Third Act and is mobilizing climate change activists who are over 60 years of age to both protect the climate and strengthen democracy. In the following interview, our ESD colleague, Linda Warner, will ask Bill to address, among other things, the connection between climate action and working for a strong democracy. Our audience can ask Bill questions following the conversation. That'll happen at 10:45. Please put your questions in the chat, and I will try to see that as many of these get addressed as possible. With that, Linda, please take it away.
Thank you, Geoff, and welcome, Bill. We're excited and very grateful to have you with us today, and everyone's waiting to hear from you. So let's get started. What are the highest priority ways for Americans to effectuate action against climate change? And where does protecting democracy place on this list?
Well, Linda, what a pleasure to get to join everybody. And greetings from Vermont, where we have our first little snowfall of the year on the ground, and got out for an hour of cross-country skiing this morning, so I'm feeling rosy-cheeked and ready to go. And it's good because it's been a depressing, obviously, stretch of time, and it's good to figure out how to do the things that keep us going a little bit. Mm-hmm. thanks to everybody for all your good work. And it's really a pleasure to get to talk here today, because the two issues that Third Act works on are climate and democracy, because for us, they feel like the things that have gone most awry, and because they feel deeply connected. And if I had to explain sort of the sense of how they've gone awry, it would be something like this. None of us are naive, and we've known that, say, the environment has been under threat for a very long time. There are people on this call, I'm willing to wager, who marched on the first Earth Day in April of 1970. We understood the threat to be mostly against polluted air and polluted water, and we figured out the things to do to clean those up. And those things are cleaner than they were in our youth, which is good. But we missed taking action on the biggest, most dangerous thing of all, one that emerged later in our lifetimes, this climate crisis. And now we're way behind the eight ball. We've watched the poles begin to melt, the jet stream and the Gulf Stream begin to flicker. We're seeing chaos of a scale that we could barely imagine, and that's just the beginning of the global warming era. If we don't take action very soon, this will get not just worse, it'll get worse to the point where the chances of having civilizations like the ones we're used to are essentially nil. Our democratic systems, such as they are, already are at risk because of things like the extraordinary increase in the number of climate refugees around the world. Always a driving force in political instability, and one that sadly we've shown ourselves so far unable to fully deal with. Similarly, we're not naive about politicians and politics. We lived through Watergate, after all. But in that case, the system more or less worked. And perhaps we let down our guard some. And now we face completely unprecedented challenges to the idea of democracy in ways that we could not have begun to imagine in our youth. I mean, we've watched now as thousands of our countrymen have stormed the nation's capital, killing police officers in order to stop the counting of the votes. Last week, we listened to the front runner for our next presidential election describe people that he disagreed with as vermin who need to be exterminated. Anybody who listens to that and doesn't hear the echoes of history needs the wax cleaned out of their ears, and soon. So this is a moment of extraordinary threat, and also perhaps of a certain amount anyway of opportunity. And those are the things we're trying to figure out how to seize at Third Act. We're both a 501c3 and a 501c4, which means that we're capable of being as directly involved in the political fray as we want to be. And that's what we're doing now in state after state and place after place. Endorsing candidates, turning out voters, knocking on doors, phone banking, on and on and on, at the same time that we're doing lots of climate activism. So let me describe, just to get us started, one particular way that we're thinking about how these two things mesh in this election. I've been doing a lot of writing for the New Yorker in the last 2 or 3 months about this truly enormous emergent threat to the climate, which is natural gas exports out of the Gulf of Mexico. We've been building this at a very rapid rate to the point where America is already the biggest gas exporter in the world. But the companies doing it want to quadruple the amount of gas that they're exporting. And they're applying for all kinds of permits and licenses to build new facilities. This is dangerous because gas, we now know from a whole series of new studies, is as dirty as coal when we use it here close to home, between the carbon when you burn it and the methane that leaks when in the process. When you add putting it on a ship and sending it around the world, it becomes much worse than coal. If the industry gets everything they want, and so far the Department of Energy under both Trump and Biden have approved every request for a permit that's come in. If they get what they want, within 10 years or so, US liquefied natural gas exports will produce as much greenhouse gas pollution, as many emissions, as everything that happens on the continent of Europe. Every car, factory, and home from Finland to Greece. It's as if we've discovered a new continent of greenhouse gas emissions. So we badly need to stop the Department of Energy from doing this. And I think that we may be able to build a campaign demanding that they stop granting these licenses, at least until they've reevaluated the Trump era criteria that they're using to grant them. However, we don't want to do it in such a way that helps elect Donald Trump president. We don't want to go attack the current administration, because A, we don't want to live in an authoritarian state, and B, even if we win the fight on natural gas permitting now, if we do it in such a way that it helps Donald Trump, the minute he takes office, he'll quickly grant all these permits again. So our victory will have been Pyrrhic, temporary at the very best. And so the way that we're trying to plan how to do this is to figure out how to make it in a way, how to do it in a way that allows it to be a win for Biden and allows him to recapture, we hope, the affection of some of those people who've been worried, especially young voters, by the moves he's made, like opening a big new oil drilling complex in Alaska and so on. You'll be seeing, perhaps, depending on how this sort of strategy works out, calls to come to Washington for civil disobedience later in the winter. But it'll be aimed at the Department of Energy, and the gist of it will be that the Department of Energy is giving the president bad information, and we need them to change it up so that the president can do what we know he wants to do. And in the process, we hope, help allow the defeat of Mr. Trump in the next election. It's worth remembering that the last couple of times, his election for sure, and George Bush's election in 2000, the margin of difference was within the margin that went to the Green Party, and trying to figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen again seems like a high priority. So I'm talking here in quite strategic and detailed terms. I'm happy to talk about the huge amount of work that Third Act does every day in terms of registering voters and phone banking and turning people out and things. But I'm just sort of giving you a behind the scenes look at how I think about how these things mesh together in the way that you asked about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You may have really already hit on the next question, which is, what was the rationale for forming Third Act? What are the main goals?
Sure. The rationale was mostly to do our best to continue unleashing the power of older people as a progressive force in our politics, which I think is deeply insufficiently realized. There's 70 million of us over the age of 60, and that's a potentially tremendously powerful block of people. And I think that far more of them are progressive than people imagine. The standard political wisdom, political science wisdom, is that people become more conservative as they age. And if you look at voting patterns and things, there's some truth behind that. but I don't think there needs to be. And I think that one of our basic insights is that those of us who are in our 60s or 70s or 80s at the moment, um, our first act was in a period of great social and economic and cultural transformation. The moment when we started taking women seriously in public life, the first Earth Day in 1970, the apex of the civil rights movement. If you have any doubt about the importance of those years, look at what our retrograde Supreme Court has been targeting so far. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the Clean Air Act of 1971, and Roe v. Wade 1973. Their entire worldview is rolling back our first act. So that was certainly part of it. The other part is that I'm convinced that there's a great opportunity to do a lot of cross-generational collaboration work with young people. I've spent most of my life organizing with young people because that's been mostly who's wanted to organize. Started 350.org with 7 college students, this huge divestment campaign that's now at $40 trillion in endowments and portfolios divested from coal or gas or oil, was fought largely in universities. The kids who came out of that formed the Sunrise Movement that brought us the Green New Deal. Greta has become a dear friend and someone I love to work with. It was a great pleasure to get to send her in June a letter of congratulations on her graduation from high school. Think about that a minute. But I did get tired of hearing people say, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve these problems, which sounds supportive, but really is just the opposite. It's ignoble and highly impractical because young people, for all their energy and intelligence and idealism, lack the structural power to make change on the scale we need in the time that we have by themselves. If you look around for who has structural power, well, one way to say it, I think, is, at least for guys like me, if you've reached the age where you have hair coming out your ears, you probably have structural power coming out your ears too. We vote in huge numbers, so we have lots of political power. No one has figured out a way to stop old people from voting. And we ended up with most of the money. So we have great power to influence Wall Street too. And we badly needed those things. And it's been great fun to put that to work. Third Act has grown very, very, very fast. We now have very active chapters pretty much everywhere. And we also have working groups devoted to what it was people did during their lives. So there's Third Act lawyers and Third Act educators and Third Act healthcare professionals and, on and on and on. And between those geographic working groups and sort of affinity working groups, we've been able to, even in our very short history, we won't turn 2 till next month, cause a lot of trouble. People may have seen the day of action that we pulled off in March, where we had 100 demonstrations in 100 cities against the big banks that bankroll the fossil fuel industry: Chase City, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. It was really the first big action by the climate movement post-pandemic in a kind of nationwide basis. And it was really fun to be able to have elders taking the lead here. I was in DC that day, and we shut down the banks with civil disobedience actions. We're too old, I'm too old anyway, to enjoy the prospect of sprawling on the sidewalk for 3 or 4 hours at a time. So we went to all the Goodwill outlets in the greater DC area and came away with a few hundred rocking chairs. And that's what we used to lock down the banks. The New York Times the next day called it the Rocking Chair Rebellion. So we think there's a lot of work to be done on that front. And truthfully, I'll say that I think older people have a particular role to play here. I organized the civil disobedience actions at the beginning of the Keystone Pipeline fight, which were the biggest civil disobedience actions about anything in this country in a very long time. About 1,200, and some of us went to jail. And one of the things I said when I wrote the letter about it was, I don't think young people should have to be the cannon fodder here. Because if you're 19, it's possible an arrest record's not the best thing for your resume, you know. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you, you know? And so we didn't, when people were getting arrested, we didn't ask them, how old are you? That would be rude. But we did say, and I think quite cleverly, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. On the final day, one of the last people arrested had a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He was old enough that he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration. Frankly, I'd all but forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. But what was wonderful was that the young people who were there got to see elders acting the way I think we need elders acting in a working civilization. Not necessarily going to jail, though I'm forever impressed by the number of people who tell me that it's on their bucket list and can I help them? And generally I can. But people acting outside their comfort zone. Our planet and our democracy are outside their comfort zones now, way outside. So we better figure out how to be outside ours too, in whatever that means to people. Because right now we're not doing enough to win these fights. And so we wanted to bring a lot more people on board. That's why we started Third Act. That's a very long answer to a very straightforward and sensible question.
Covered a lot, and you talked about intergenerational actions. And what can we do to motivate and empower younger voters to take climate action?
So on climate stuff, young people are fully engaged. They understand the issue, and they understand they're looking down the barrel, of a lifetime on a steadily degrading planet. And if you want to understand why they're depressed and anxious, and why a lot of them are saying, you know what, I'm not going to have any kids, that's why. And it's, I wish I could tell them that they were wrong about all of this. I certainly advise them to have a kid if they want one and things, but I can't. What we can do is try a little bit to relieve their sense of cynicism about the political system. And I think the most important way to do that is just to reassure them that they are not being abandoned to their fate. And one of the things that we've been working on that's really been fun is, for both sides, is this program we've been calling Senior to Senior, where we're having older voters writing high school seniors to tell them about their own history of voting and why it mattered to them, and encourage them to register. Only about 10% of high school seniors manage to register and vote in the first election for which they're eligible. And it's really been remarkable for the people engaged in it on both sides. I remember giving a talk not too long ago at a retirement community, and when I was done, they took me up to the hospital wing, and there was a woman there, 97 or 98 years old, who was confined to bed, but she was writing 10 and 15 letters a day because she wanted very much to continue to have some agency in the world, some effect on the world that she cared so deeply about. And by the same token, young people getting these letters are often blown away. It turns out that if you're 17, there's a pretty good chance that no one's ever actually written you a letter in your entire life. You've been getting, Snapchats and Instagrams and things for a long time, but it turns out that Palmer penmanship that you worked hard on many, many years ago actually is a kind of superpower now, because it really catches people's attention in a way that the latest video or whatever doesn't. We just had our membership write over the weekend letters to the Department of Energy, and then a lot of people took a photo of them on their phone and sent us the photo to see. We generated thousands of handwritten letters, and I am pretty sure that that's doing good work at DOE right now. Because they're used to getting lots of email petitions and whatever, but they're not used anymore to having people write them letters. The working with kids is really fun, and it takes a certain amount of willingness to be a little self-deprecating. We started doing this work on banks because Fridays for the Future, which is the kind of offshoot of Greta Thunberg's movement, she was doing her school strikes on Fridays. And so that's the day that got adopted around the world. So the US chapter of Fridays for the Future told us they wanted to work on banks, but that most of them weren't old enough to have a credit card or a checking account or whatever else. So we were like, yeah, well, we've all got checking accounts. So, and I remember the first big demonstration we did, it was in Boston outside the big banks there. And there were 200 or 300 high school kids there, because high school kids completely get and understand this. And they're a little bit sprier, so they were at the head of the march. But at the back of the march, there was a big crowd of us from Third Act with a big banner that just said "Fossils Against Fossil Fuels." And all the kids who saw it laughed and, were high-fiving everybody and whatever. And it's, it became a kind of watchword for us in how to provide support as best we can. And I'll just say that one of the things we've discovered is that the relationship between people the age of grandchildren and grandparents is much easier than the relationship of people the age of parents and children. All grandparents love all their grandchildren unconditionally, no matter what nonsense they're up to. And all grandchildren are wise enough to cut their grandparents some slack in ways that they would never think of doing for their parents, So it's actually been a really powerful and profound working relationship that we've really enjoyed over this period. And I highly recommend figuring out how to do some of it.
Great, great. Well, of course, our country has other serious problems in addition to climate change. To name a few: gun violence, reproductive rights. But polls show that climate change is a top priority for only a small minority of voters. And we know that some candidates have been advised to avoid prioritizing climate change because they might alienate centrist voters who are more concerned about other issues. Do you think that a candidate who takes a stand to combat climate change will be helped or hindered in their chance to be elected?
I think it depends a little bit where you are, but I think that that's changed a lot. Certainly in primaries, in Democratic primaries, it's been super important to be climate engaged. Voters in the 2020 Democratic primaries had climate change as their number one issue. And that's why Joe Biden, who had never particularly focused on this at all, really made the first 2 years of his presidency, in some sense, about climate change. The IRA is his signature accomplishment. This vast climate bill that he somehow had to get through Joe Manchin and the Congress, and managed to do it. And that's entirely because of all that work that young people especially put in to making that the highest profile issue. And I think, though there are other things happening in the world right now, that it's likely that that will continue to be a high profile issue. 2023 was the hottest year, the scientists tell us, in at least the last 125,000 years. And the ensuing chaos that we're now beginning to see on every front, I think will keep this top of mind for a lot of people. This was the year when from New York to Boston to Washington, everybody was breathing wildfire smoke for weeks on end and watching their skies obscured and so on. So I think it's an important issue to keep emphasizing, because it's the most important issue in the world, and in political terms, I think it's increasingly a winning issue. The polling shows that about 70% of Americans care about climate change and understand its basic dimensions. In America today, 70% on any topic is a fairly remarkable achievement. And so I think there's no reason not to be making it a priority when we communicate with politicians and so on.
We know that the actions of the radical right pose a growing threat to American democracy, and that affects climate and other critical issues that require legislation and regulation to confront them. What role can we elders play in combating this threat?
I think that we can play a huge role, because I think that we have the grounding to be able to say, we have the historical context to be able to point out how weird things are getting. Like if you're 21, your total number of presidents that you've been conscious for is 2. So you may well know that Donald Trump is a bad guy, but you don't understand the way that many of us do, that he's utterly different from anything that's ever come before. There's been plenty of presidents I didn't much care for, but there's never been a president that I would have, been afraid to leave my daughter with for 10 minutes while I went to the store for a gallon of milk. This guy's different from anything that's happened before. He's a violent, destructive, abusive force in our society. And that becomes more obvious with each passing year. So when he starts talking about, vermin and exterminating them, it's up to us to say, you know what, we're almost old enough to have historical memory of when the last time that there were political figures in the world who talked like that. This is not normal. This is not politics in the way that we've dealt with it all our lives. This is something entirely different and dangerous. And we need to be having those conversations in the larger community, and we need to be having them in the community of elder Americans, reminding people how strange, chaotic, violent, disruptive, ugly our politics is getting. I find very few people, when they actually sit and think about it, or have someone who think that it's a good idea to have people storming the Capitol and killing police officers. But the passage of time tends to kind of normalize things a little bit, and people sort of forget and whatever, move on. One of our jobs is just to keep saying, no, this is nothing like the world that we grew up in. And it's unacceptable. And I really think that's important, because, beyond the traditional lines of progressives and conservatives and Republicans and Democrats or whatever else. There's an important line to be drawn now between the normal bounds of behavior and abnormal, unacceptable, crazy political behavior of the kind that history tells us exactly where it'll lead if we let it keep happening.
Well, we just have time for one more question. What are the best ways for ESD and Third Act to interact?
Well, whenever you guys have things going that we can help with, let us know. And we've got lots and lots and lots of campaigns that we need help with all the time. There's an immense amount of work to be done. So check in with the local chapter or with thirdact.org in the Central, and we will hook you up with more work than you will know what to do with. And the only thing we'll guarantee is it'll be useful and productive work, because I think we've done a good job of finding the right partners to work with around the country on fight after fight after fight. Right now is a good moment to be checking in a little bit, because I think this liquefied natural gas fight that I'm describing, which I think is the single biggest climate fight left on the planet, seems to be one that Third Act is ending up spearheading. And so there'll be lots and lots of information in the months to come. And we're about to launch a 3 or 4 part webinar series that I'll be doing a lot of the work on the kind of history of nonviolent direct action and how it works and what the tactics are and things. We're big believers in education. We have what amounts to a kind of Third Act university where we work hard on educating each other about what we need to do and how we need to do it at all times. And we intersperse that as best we can with a little bit of fun too. When kids are teasing me about being old and the whole okay boomer thing and stuff, I always smile and say, yes, of course you're right, I understand what you're saying. But then I generally say, on the other hand, there's no denying that our generation produced the best music there ever was. And so it's been really fun to have all, Carole King and Bette Midler and Neil Young. And we just did a big program last night for Third Act Connecticut, a kind of formal launch. And Connecticut's wonderful musician, Paul Winter, who some of you must know, was the musical guest and did a terrific job. We think all that stuff's really important. We think that art and music are really important parts of political organizing. Environmentalists and other kind of campaigners are good at appealing to whichever hemisphere it is of the human brain that likes bar graphs and pie charts and stuff, but not so good at appealing traditionally to the kind of more visceral, and that's really important. It's impossible to imagine, say, the civil rights movement without music as a key part of its appeal. And we very much want to build on that in lots of ways. We've got a wonderful kind of artist in residence. Some of you may know the great writer Rebecca Solnit, who I think is the best essayist at work in America, but her brother David is the best public artist in America. If you see some of these banners behind me, they're from these art builds we did around the country in place after place. David taught everybody how to silkscreen and do fantastic banners and posters in the weeks leading up to that big bank action in 100 cities. And that was one of the reasons it was so effective, because it had this beautiful, consistent imagery all behind. So, come join us. And our only kind of ground rules are, a kind of basic kindness, and that you bring your creativity with you.
Great. We look forward to that. And we are out of time. Thank you so much. we'll go back to Joff for questions that came up in the chat during this talk.
Linda, thank
you.
you
Yes.
very much for those good questions, and what a pleasure to get to talk with you.
Thank you.
So, Bill, a number of questions from the audience. The one I'll start with is, in your view, what is the most important climate legislation to work for? In particular, what do you think about the merits of a carbon tax?
So let me say just first of all that you got to divide the climate fight in half. Half of the job is building lots and lots and lots of clean renewable energy now, which is possible because the price of a solar panel or wind turbines dropped 90% in the last decade, thanks to great engineers. That's wonderful. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That's very new and very important. The other half of the equation is shutting down dirty energy as fast as we can, leaving stuff in the ground. So that's this work around LNG. A carbon tax would actually do both these things to one degree or another, and hence it's always been useful public policy. But I confess I've never spent an immense amount of time on it, though I've helped my friends at Citizens Climate Lobby as best I could on, in many ways over the years. But truthfully, my political analysis was always anything that could be labeled a tax was a very hard push in American political life. And I'm afraid that's been borne out over the 15 years of really superb hard work by people at Citizens Climate Lobby. But it doesn't, I don't think, I think by the time we have the political constituency to really produce a significant carbon fee, we'll be at the point where we don't really need one anymore. It's really hard in our political system to get this done. Something we realized a year ago when hidden camera video caught the chief lobbyist for Exxon saying, Exxon supports, has always pretended to support a carbon tax because they know it'll never pass and it gets them off the hook. So I'm afraid, as usual, his political analysis was both venal and accurate.
Thank you for that. So another question is, what are your thoughts about where plastic pollution should fall in the set of priorities we should all have about the climate and pollution?
I think it's important, and I don't think it's existential in quite the same way that the climate crisis is, but it's deeply connected. Basically, the plastics industry is a subset of the petrochemical industry. And it's pretty much the same people. I think Exxon's now the biggest producer of plastic in the world. So trying to take on this industry and break its political power, which is what a lot of our work is about, is essential in both these fights, and they're linked in that way. And I get to do a lot of work. I'm on the board of a group called Beyond Plastics, and my friend Judy Enck, who's really been doing fantastic work on this for a long time now.
Great. There's a question here about biomass and the dangers of pelletized fast growth US pines,
Amen.
which are being sent apparently to Denmark to replace coal for electricity. So this is billed as carbon neutral.
Yes, it's not. And it's really an important question. It's not as big as coal and gas and oil, but it's growing. And an awful lot of it is coming from the US. They're deforesting large parts of the southeastern US to make wood pellets. Some of them go to Denmark. The biggest number go to Europe. To the UK. And the biggest single source of carbon in all of Europe is the massive pellet burning power plant in the UK run by the Drax Corporation, which sounds appropriately evil, and it is. This is a really important fight. We're fighting it place after place after place with great allies like the Dogwood Alliance in the Carolinas and so on and so forth. But it all rests on this misunderstanding that biomass is healthy carbon alternative. The misunderstanding is if you cut down a tree, eventually one will grow in its place and soak that carbon up. But the eventually is the problem. Biomass is very energy in carbon intensive. So you get a huge puff of carbon into the atmosphere right now when we're breaking the back of the climate system. And it doesn't really matter that it gets soaked up 50 or 80 years down the line. By that time, the damage will be done. So this is something we desperately do not want to let get out of hand.
Another question is, every time we hear of an assessment about how we're doing in terms of getting to carbon neutrality, things look bleaker and bleaker. What is your personal view about the likelihood that we'll avoid the 2-degree limit?
We're going to go past 1.5 degrees in the next few months, at least temporarily. I think the momentum in this system is strong enough that the chance of staying below 2 degrees is small. But I think that fighting for that is a very useful thing to do because it may be the fight that allows us to stay below 2.5 degrees or 3 degrees Celsius. And when you get up to those numbers, you're talking about things that just challenge our ability to have civilizations. That's a world in so much chaotic and violent flux that I think it won't work. So doing all that we can to stop short of any of those numbers is crucial.
So given how dire things are, what are your thoughts now about using nuclear energy and also potentially direct air capture of carbon dioxide?
I'd be researching both, but at the moment, both are really too expensive to be a huge help here. Nuclear power, I mean, no one's building nuclear power plants, and the reason is that they're super expensive. And really that disadvantage grows all the time because the price of sun and wind and batteries just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping every quarter. And so the spreadsheet gets more difficult. I think the future mostly lies, at least in the next 5 or 6 years. And remember, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has told us we need to cut emissions in half by 2030. I think sun, wind, and batteries are the main technologies that allow us to do that in the short run. In the long run, there are people who insist, and one of them is my old and trusted friend, Jim Hansen, the greatest climate scientist ever, that we may be on the edge of developments of small modular reactors that, that are safer and so on and so forth. So far, their economics aren't proving out. But if they do, things like that may be useful. And the same with direct air capture of carbon. It's a very good thing to be researching. It's a completely dumb thing to be relying on at the moment, these things are basically being used to greenwash and to allow us to keep burning stuff now on the theory that someday we'll suck it back up. But that's a very bad theory to be working on, especially since we don't need to. And I really want to emphasize again the fact the cheapest power on the planet now comes from the sun and wind. We're used to thinking of renewable energy as alternative. I think we're used to thinking of it as the kind of whole foods of energy. But really, it's the Costco of energy at this point. It is the cheap stuff. And if we could get that through our heads, then we would be deploying at extraordinary rates these things we badly need to deploy.
Thanks. So I think we have time for one last question. And that one is, how effective do you think in the US nonviolent civil disobedience is, particularly with respect to, the importance of electoral politics, voting and lobbying?
I think it's one tool in the activist toolkit. And I think like any tool, if you use it too much, it becomes literally and metaphorically dull. And so you should not rely on it. I think, though, there are times when it's just the right tool to choose. It was the tool we needed to get, for instance, the Keystone fight off the ground and make people pay attention and notice. And I think it probably may be required to help us win this LNG fight, because it heightens the moral urgency of things and draws attention to them. But as I said before, I think that it's best when used in conjunction with a kind of smart electoral analysis. And I think as we do this LNG fight, for instance, a key thing is going to be avoiding villainizing Biden. We have to figure out a narrative, a story that makes him the hero here, where he rides in and saves us from the bureaucrats at the Department of Energy who have been leading us down the garden path, and that'll be setting up that story, and that win is an important thing because electoral politics are the necessary foundation of the progress we badly need to make.
Bill, thanks so much for what you've said. At this point, we're going to switch gears and have a breakout session with small groups of our audience. And this will be managed by Paul Dreyfus. Paul?
Take care, y'all.
Paul, you're muted.
I was muted. Thank you, Joff, and thank you, Bill. A lot of food for thought there. And as we transition into the second half of the meeting, we're going to talk about some specifics of how we push back and organize, building on some of the ideas that Bill had shared. And what we want to do in the breakout is we want to really go back to our own personal experience of what we see in our own communities and more generally about what can be done in the political process and using electoral politics to push back against climate change, push for climate sanity, and push for the other rights that are under attack from the Supreme Court and the far right. So we have a total of 20 minutes allocated. So I think we could break out for 15 minutes. And Crystal, I don't know if you already have a scheme set up for breakouts, but I was thinking about 4 people per breakout room. Then we're going to come back for 5 minutes. And we'll only have time for probably 2 or 3 comments, but I would encourage if you don't get a chance to share something that you think would be of strong interest to the group, please at that point put it in the chat box, and we will preserve the chat so that we capture all those ideas. So on that note, I'm hoping we can break out now. Crystal, if you can help us with that. Just gonna wait 1 minute till make sure everybody's back in the room. We had 109 people go out, so, and we have 58 back, so hopefully.
That's not bad.
Everybody got hungry, had to go get a snack.
Wonderful to have so many people.
Right.
So many people came to this.
All right, well, I don't know who's coming back or not, but we have time. We probably have about 5 minutes for sharing. So, I'm looking for hands, electronic or otherwise. I don't see any yet, but I'm only on page 1. Let me go to page 2 and 3. Not seeing a hand on page
Paul, Harry, Rick Moody, and Pamela Donhauer have their hands up.
Okay, Rick, why don't you go ahead, and then Pamela.
We had a great group. One of our members from New Hampshire had to leave halfway in order to talk to his
legislator because he's so active in doing things. And we talked about how do we do that. I mentioned Climate Action Now, where I send 75 messages every day. We talked about what's going on in Miami. One of our members is expecting the waters to rise soon, and she's trying to get the message out. We talked to somebody else from my state, California, and we all agreed that it's important to think globally, but act locally. Personal connection is key. That's our message. Personal connection.
Thank you, Rick and Pamela.
Yeah, I really like that. Think globally and act locally. And I was thinking, my first connection with Bill McKibben was on Capitol Hill marching against the Exxon pipeline. But I think the title of his talk today has something to do with our democracy. And I think there's now the children's trust that's really saying to our legislators and our governments that we are entitled to a healthy environment. And you see more and more, instead of going the legal route, fighting for our constitutional rights to have a healthy environment. And I just wondered if other groups had talked about this, coming at the issue from that angle. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Alain?
Yeah, we talk mostly in our group of what we can do locally, and particularly engage at this conjunction between local democracy and climate. How can we engage people who are in a very different position that we are, a different perspective that we are? And I mentioned the building bridges and living room conversations as a tool that enables us to really move forward with people who are initially quite separate in their perspective. So that's one of the things we talked a little bit about. And so
Thank you, Alain.
These tools are available and within.
Thank you, Alain. And unfortunately, the clock is not being our friend right now. So at this point, I'm going to conclude this segment and turn it over to Therese Flaherty, who's going to lead us in a little presentation and discussion about specific actions and opportunities for this pushback, for reestablishing and reinvigorating democracy and pushing back against this far-right menace. So over to you, Therese. Sorry, Richard Page with your hand up. If you'd like to share in the chat box, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. So this is the part of our program where we want to share with you some of the local actions that relate to climate and democracy that we at EAN are working on. And there are three. Because we're short on time, what I'm going to do is briefly talk through the three, and we will send you a PDF. Can you hear me, Paul? Yeah?
I can hear you.
We'll send you a PDF when we're done. And I think we are really quite short on time. So I'll ask John and Paul to comment maybe after I get through to the end, so you've all seen everything and you can each add. So, oops, come on here, let's go. Okay, so we are very, very focused on the national election over the next year, and how do we plan our efforts and our impact so as to at least have that election next fall and the primaries during the spring make a difference. And the first of the major activities that EAN and ESD are sponsoring are state teams, and probably many of you who are on this Zoom this afternoon have been on state teams before. John is spearheading this, and the effort this year is really looking at finding ways to take effective elder action in the states, not just having people from the state that we're working in, but from across the country making a difference in some key states. And the last bullet point is something that John has been working on and know is going to make a big difference, that we're committed to establishing firm and durable foundations to the state teams so that what we do this year will go on, not like some of the teams we've had in the past, which works for an election season, but not beyond it. So you'll see that there are state team launches that are starting. We want to welcome people. We're going to give mentorship to the people who are leading these new state teams. We're going to talk about a small number of state teams, not 10 or 11, but really make the 3 that we're working on well supported and working. And the 3 that we're going to work on this year are Arizona. You can see the contact people there are Betty Roth, who actually comes a lot from Third Act, and John Sorensen, who comes, of course, from Climate Action and also from EAN. And in Arizona, they're quite well developed. They really have quite a number of people already working hard, and they have a very strong collaboration with Third Act. And they're very happy to have people, I know this is true, and John can say more at the end, very happy to have people from outside Arizona who are concerned with what's going to happen and would like to focus and amplify their energies. Wisconsin is an absolutely critical state, and Linda Warner is she's continuity from the last election cycle. She has a small but intrepid team in Wisconsin, and they are getting ready to work, and they're very interested to have some other people help. Paul is spearheading Florida, and from what I understand, there's quite a lot of interest from elders and from various democracy organizations. So if you are interested in working with Florida and making it work, Paul's the person to email, and you'll get this as a follow-up email to this program fairly shortly. And I will come back to this in a moment. The other big active opportunity that we see is the Environmental Voter Project, which many of you have probably already been involved with. They have amazing phone banks, and their basic idea is to create real long-term voters, that so many environmental people who care about the environment don't vote. They got disaffected. And so the Environmental Voter Project is out there giving lots of touches to people who are maybe are not voting in elections and turning them into super voters. And a super voter is someone who votes in every election, local elections, as well as state and presidential elections. And they've been very, very successful at that. And here's just a little bit, and they measure it very carefully. If you're familiar with them, you know that the super voters, these are just some examples, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona, they make the margin of victory. They're very important. And what we can do to help the Environmental Voter Project do that is going to make a difference. So how do you do it? You call voters, and they're very good at running the phone banks. You can send postcards, you can canvass. I certainly say if you're interested, sign up for their newsletter, and we have their link right here. Then the third thing is probably the newest EAN activity, and that is to help make voter registration part of every American high school experience. Really go to the young voters, the voters who are 18 to 24 and who very often don't vote. So for those of you who haven't heard me speak about this before, I'll ask you a question that the Civic Center, our great partner, asks, and that is, if a young person is registered to vote, what are the chances that they will vote in a presidential election? Don't answer, just think. What do you think? The answer is 76%. Oh my God. Less than half of them are actually registered. So the Civic Center has, for the last 5 or 6 years, been attacking that bottleneck in a few states and increasingly across the country to get kids registered to vote. And they do it by supporting student-run voter registration drives. And we actually had a program in mid-August to late September where we had about 50 EAN elders involved, making phone calls and identifying people at the high school staff who could be key people to bring a voter registration drive to a high school. And what we found was it was satisfying. It really did take fewer than 10 hours for the most part. And we are beginning, here's the data on youth vote, of course, makes the difference. What we're doing now as we look forward to the end of the year is supporting the center, the Civic Center, which truly supports and helps each high school get training for students, get banners to run a drive, all kinds of information about how to run a voter registration drive. And they will do this in the spring, trying to get every high school to make voter registration part of graduation, we hope. And then again in the fall, voter registration before November, because in almost every state, in over 40 states, kids can register to vote before they're 18. And it varies a little bit from state to state, but it's a prime time to get them registered in high schools. And I will say, we have at kickoff, we have a few of these possibilities to participate and support the Civic Center, well-defined actions, less than 10 hours a month. Our kickoff will be Tuesday, January 30th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Pacific Time. We'll be doing some of the things we've done before. They also have a very interesting deal where they buy mailing lists of progressive parents, and then they have a very easy way to send a letter, for us to send letters to those parents asking them to remind their kids to register to vote. And they've been measuring the impact. It's great. It's a lot easier from my standpoint than postcarding. And it works quite well. We'll be kicking that off in January in Pennsylvania, I think. And then we have a number of our friends and colleagues who are really living beside or near high schools they care about, or where their grandkids go. And so a number of us are already encouraging high schools that might not have been on the radar for the Civic Center to start student-run voter registration drives, have policies at school boards that support that. And we'll be having a group of people supporting each other as they do that, and we'll be able to use Civic Center tools to support those high schools. So here's our list of things I just spoke through, and if you're interested in those, you can email me. Oh, and I should say, I would love people to also join us on our leadership team. So we manage this and coordinate all the efforts. And then finally, we're at 12:28. So if you value the Elders Action Network, we hope you will consider supporting us and making a donation at eldersaction.org. I am now going to, John, would you like to have the last word? I will stop sharing as soon as I can figure out how to do that. Here we go.
Thank you.
No, I meant John Sorensen. I'm so sorry, John.
All right. Yeah.
I think we should just say thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We had a terrific program. I think I was so fortunate to have Bill McKibben with us and his wisdom, and we've captured it in our recording. And we'll be probably splicing this up into small pieces and make it a good video out of the whole thing for us. But anyway, thank you for being with us. I hope we will see you again. There's lots to work on, like he said. Let's roll up our sleeves and I hesitate to say we need to work harder, but we did, the other thing he made a point of, we need to have fun while we do this. We're working for our grandkids and all future generations, and we got to keep that in mind to do that. And by all means, if you have something, John Weigand, put your comment in the chat, and every one of you, we'll stay open here for a while if you'd like to stay around and say some things where we don't have to close right now, but we are officially closed, but we can keep the mic open here for everybody who would like to say it, and we'll hear from anybody who would like to speak.
John, could I just add that, and this meeting made it so obvious, that partnership is our superpower, that we work with great organizations that have expertise in their domain. Third Act, Civic Center, Environmental Voter Project. We'd like to grow that to 2, 3, 4 more strong partnerships. That is really how we're going to make this into a massive pushback, that we've just got to all work together and make it happen.
I see Paloma Pavel has a hand up. I don't know if Paloma is with us. I see Jeff Johnson has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say that I thought Bill's presentation was through the roof wonderful. I learned so much, and it gave me great ideas for future direction and actions that I can be involved in my local community. How might I give a special thanks to Bill? I could send him a Thanksgiving card, or I guess I go to his website and so on and thank him. But at any rate, maybe you through me or can give him a big thanks for what I thought was a wonderful presentation.
We'll find that out and make everybody's going to get a follow on here with a copy of the recording and the slides that were used and so forth. And so we'll have his